Hello and welcome back to Turkish Spotlight Secrets. If you love diving into the real, unpolished moments behind Turkey's brightest stars, you're in exactly the right place. Before we get swept up in today's intimate story, tap that like button, hit subscribe, and if you want to show extra love, click the join button. Your support helps us bring you the kinds of behind-the-scenes stories people whisper about but never fully tell. Now, let's get into it. When we talk about the electricity between two people, the mind jumps to big scenes and louder-than-life declarations. But for Akın Akınözü and Ebru Şahin, the moment that has stayed with them most wasn't splashed across a red carpet or staged for a glossy spread. It wasn't a headline, it wasn't a speech, it wasn't even a performance. It was quieter than all that, more revealing precisely because of its simplicity. It lived in that space where two people finally stop performing, even for themselves, and simply exist together. Picture the end of a long shoot, the kind that drains you and lights you up at the same time. It was the wrap party, with music rolling through the speakers and voices overlapping in a warm blur. People were toasting, hugging, laughing at jokes that had been building for months. But in the middle of it all, a single moment stood out for those who noticed it, a wordless exchange between Akın and Ebru that explained more than any interview ever could. Their eyes locked across the room, not dramatically, not theatrically, just honestly. It wasn't a show. It was a pause, a small break in the noise that felt like a deep breath after holding it all day. For a heartbeat, they seemed to step into a room of their own, even though they hadn't moved at all. There was no script and no camera, but something real happened where their eyes met, the kind of understanding that doesn't ask for explanations. That look traveled faster than words, carrying relief, warmth, and the sudden calm of being profoundly seen. Later that night, they slipped out into the Istanbul streets, where a soft drizzle had begun to fall. The city was dressed in reflections, the lights stretching across wet pavement like careful brushstrokes. They didn't call a car right away. They walked with their jackets pulled a little tighter, letting the rain settle their nerves. That tiredness, the satisfying kind that follows a job well done, softened their edges. They laughed at something unspoken, something that felt like an inside joke without a punchline, and then they didn't speak at all. The silence wasn't empty or awkward, it was easy. It had room inside it. That walk, under a gauzy rain, became a shared secret etched into an ordinary night. It mattered not because Istanbul looked cinematic, but because for once they weren't trying to make anything happen. They just let the night carry them. How does a moment like that find its way into a life filled with schedules, cameras, and 1,000 little expectations? It begins with presence, true presence, the kind that refuses to split itself between a person and a screen. Too often we sit side by side and aren't really there. But when Akın and Ebru made space for each other, they did it all the way. They tucked into a small cafe far from the usual crowd, the kind with fogged windows and the smell of roasted beans lingering in the air. Phones stayed in bags. The conversation didn't need ornaments, it was just the steady tide of two people catching up with their own hearts. In that kind of space, a cup of coffee can become a keepsake. A shared look becomes a promise. Nothing is grand, but everything is full. And presence gave way to vulnerability, the real test of closeness. One evening, after the city settled and the streets thinned into quiet, the light of their apartment window stretched like a warm ribbon across the room. That was the night they crossed a threshold most people avoid. Ebru spoke first, not about projects or schedules, but about the weight of being expected to glow all the time, to carry an effortless sheen even when the day had demanded too much. She admitted the tug of perfectionism, the restless worry that if she put one foot wrong, the image would crack. Then Akın opened a door of his own. He talked about the strange loneliness that success sometimes brings, the feeling that the higher you go, the fewer places there are to rest. He voiced the fear that the applause fades when the lights do, and what remains must be strong enough to live without proof. They didn't rush to fix each other. They stayed quiet when quiet was needed, letting the words settle without judgment. With each confession, they loosened the armor they wore in public and set it gently aside. But honesty and attention, as powerful as they are, don't write every memory alone. What keeps a bond alive is surprise, the willingness to say yes to what wasn't planned. That's something Akın and Ebru understand instinctively. They ducked into a nearly forgotten music shop one afternoon, the kind that still kept its records in dusty wooden crates. A needle scratched over a vinyl groove, and an old song began to play, one neither of them had heard in years but both felt in their bones. The owner smiled without interrupting as they swayed without calling it dancing. Another day they boarded a ferry without checking the schedule, letting the wind choose a direction while gulls traced bright shapes against a pale sky. They didn't talk about where they were going because it wasn't really about a destination. It was about listening to whatever the day offered and finding delight in the ordinary when it was touched by spontaneity. Those unplanned detours turned minutes into memories that didn't need photographing to endure. Shared emotion stitched these scattered moments together. There was an awards night drenched in flashing lights and brisk handshakes, the kind of evening when congratulations feel like a language spoken too quickly. They found a corner away from the crowd and took a breath. That's when a message buzzed in, one they'd been waiting on for weeks. It wasn't just an announcement, it was a door opening. They read it twice, then again, then laughed because they didn't know what else to do with the jolt of relief and joy. The happiness wasn't confined to the words on the phone, it lived in the fact that they were receiving those words together, that the weight lifted felt lighter because two sets of shoulders were carrying it. Joy is louder when it's shared, and that night it echoed, even in the quiet. And they knew sorrow as well, in the soft way it sometimes arrives. One night, an old movie played on a screen that faded the room into twilight. It wasn't a tragedy by design, not one of those films that begs you to cry. But a scene landed exactly where their own memories lived, and without intending to, they both felt the same tug. Tears welled up, a mirror image emotion, not because the script demanded it but because life had already written those lines inside them. They didn't try to swallow it down or pretend they were tougher than they felt. They let themselves be moved in tandem, and that fragile alignment made the moment feel sacred. The last thread, and perhaps the most deliberate, is intention. Magic can appear by chance, but it stays when people choose it. That's a lesson they practiced, not just in big gestures, but in small, thoughtful rituals. Sometimes Akın slipped a note between the pages of a book he knew Ebru was reading, a quiet line meant to be found at exactly the right moment, a sentence that said keep going, or I see the work you're doing, or this chapter is yours. In return, Ebru chose to make a favorite meal on evenings when fatigue pressed in from all sides, not to impress, but to bring them both back to themselves. These weren't extravagant displays. They were intentions made visible, evidence that they weren't letting the days sweep them along without a say. It's astonishing how easy it is to disappear into routine, the kind that wears down even the strongest connections. But what makes their bond compelling is not a single headline or one night of spectacle, it's the accumulation of these human-sized moments. The late-night conversations where truth sits down without makeup. The rain walks that don't demand language. The unplanned visits to places that unlock a laugh they didn't know they needed. The texts that arrive right when fear tries to take the wheel. The notes, the meals, the ferry rides, the records that crackle as if remembering their own youth. In the end, the story isn't about lightning striking. It's about learning where to look for sparks and how to keep them alive. And still, that rap night look lives in the center of it all. Ask anyone who was there, and they'll tell you the music was loud and the room was bright, but for a breath or two it felt like someone turned the volume down just for them. That glance has become their private compass, a reminder that beneath the applause and the scrutiny and the schedules, there's a place only the two of them can enter. When the world presses in, they return to that wordless room, even if they're nowhere near each other physically. They know what it felt like. They know the temperature of the air and the exact way the noise thinned into something that sounded like calm. Maybe that's the truth we forget in a culture of highlights. Love doesn't need fireworks to be unforgettable. It needs presence. It needs the courage to be seen without armor. It needs the willingness to leave the path and follow a whim. It needs shared emotion to double the joy and divide the ache. And it needs intention, the daily choice to build something steady even when no one is watching. For Akın Akınözü and Ebru Şahin, that's what continues to matter most. Not the staged picture, but the living one. Not the grand performance, but the quiet rehearsal you do every day when you choose each other. So what about you? Where did your moment find you? In a hushed cafe, in the rain on a street that didn't know your names, in a corner of a crowded room where someone finally looked back at you the way you hoped they would? Tell us your story in the comments. We read them, we feel them, and some of them linger here long after the video ends. And if you want more stories like this, of connection, courage, and the small, steady practices that make a life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and support Turkish Spotlight Secrets by clicking join. We're here for the moments that count, and we can't wait to bring you the next one.